On March 19, 2003, then American President George W. Bush addressed the American people in a historic speech announcing the beginning of the invasion of Iraq. At the beginning of that speech, Bush said what you are about to hear now.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
It was clear that Americans were being sold on the invasion as liberation, but what was actually implemented was a destructive occupation. Of course, no one expected Bush to come out and say, "We intend to occupy Iraq, destroy it, and neutralize it forever." The same applies to the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, after he led the Israeli ministerial cabinet to approve by a majority vote the full occupation of the Gaza Strip. Of course, this is manipulative and misleading talk. What the Israelis, led by Netanyahu, are actually seeking is a criminal occupation, not control nor liberation. The questions now are, what are the costs of reoccupying Gaza, and to what extent can Israel in its current situation bear them? And could Gaza turn into Israel's Vietnam? And can Israel actually occupy Gaza for a long time? And by occupation, we do not mean in the sense of destruction, but in the sense of control, remaining in Gaza and establishing military rule there. Can Israel return to occupying the Strip according to the model that was in place before it was forced to withdraw from it in 2005? This is what we will discuss together in today's episode. I am your host, and this is the Intel Runner Plus. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. In a recent meeting with Israel's Channel 12, former Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni appealed to Arnon Bar David, the head of the General Federation of Labor in Israel, known as the Histadrut. The Histadrut is a major force within the Israeli economy, capable of paralyzing it at any moment through a single decision to strike. Its power was demonstrated in late August 2024, when the Israeli army announced it had found the bodies of 6 captives in Gaza, killed shortly before their discovery. Outrage erupted, especially among the families of the detainees, who blamed Prime Minister Netanyahu for obstructing a prisoner exchange deal in order to serve his own political interests. The next day, the families met with Histadrut chief Arnon Bar David, urging him to act. By that evening, he announced, "Starting tomorrow at 6 a.m., the entire Israeli economy will go on strike." And indeed, the strike halted major sectors: transportation, aviation, banks, schools, and government offices, costing Israel hundreds of millions of dollars daily. Netanyahu and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich immediately moved to stop it, pressuring the Attorney General to petition the Labor Court. The court quickly ruled the strike illegal, arguing it was political rather than economic. It is against this backdrop that Livni recently appealed again to Bar David. She reminded him, "Last time, the court said there must be an economic reason for the strike. This time there is, because occupying Gaza is a burden on the economy, and Israel's growing isolation is a burden on the economy. Take responsibility and do what you must." As of the moment of filming this episode, there is no indication that Arnon Bar David intends to use the weapon of a comprehensive general strike against Netanyahu's government, as Livni advises him. But let us pause for a moment on her claim that the occupation of Gaza constitutes a burden on the Israeli economy, and see to what extent this is accurate. Another reminder before we move on, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us a lot. From a military perspective, the Israeli army is theoretically capable of fully occupying the Gaza Strip. Israel claims that it currently controls 75% of the Gaza Strip's area. Its recent decision, which came after the failure of Operation Chariots of Gideon to achieve its most prominent goal of returning Israeli prisoners, is related to the remaining 25% of the Strip's area, which includes densely populated areas, most notably Gaza City, which is considered the most densely populated area in the Strip, especially after a large number of Palestinians have been displaced there during the war. According to Israeli reports, in the first phase of its plan to fully occupy the Strip, the Israeli military intends to empty Gaza City of its 1 million people, which constitutes half of the Strip's population. This phase, which is expected to last 2 months, is supposed to be followed by a second phase during which the Israeli military will launch a major offensive on the city. According to Israeli media reports, the plan is expected to take several months and enjoys strong support from Netanyahu's government. However, it faces sharp opposition from Israeli security officials, who warn that it endangers the lives of Israeli detainees in Gaza and risks dragging Israel into a major strategic error. According to Israel's Channel 12, the chief of staff of the Israeli army, Eyal Zamir, told Netanyahu that occupying the Strip would drag Israel into a black hole, where it would bear responsibility for 2 million Palestinians and would embroil the army in an operation that could last for years, during which Israeli soldiers would be exposed to guerrilla warfare and, at the same time, endanger the lives of Israeli prisoners. Occupying the Strip would force Israel, firstly, to deploy a large number of its soldiers on the ground, and secondly, it would burden it with responsibility for 2 million civilians' daily needs as an occupying power under international law. From food, healthcare, education, health services, and all aspects of civilian life. This brings us to the economic aspect of the Israeli occupation plan. According to a study by Stefan Klor, professor of economics at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, occupying the Gaza Strip would cost Israel annually approximately 35 billion shekels, or about $10 billion, which constitutes approximately 2% of the Israeli GDP. This is only the cost of soldiers' salaries and civilian services in Gaza. This does not include the costs of rebuilding the infrastructure in the Strip, which the Israeli military has systematically destroyed since the beginning of the war. Israel might find itself forced to bear the cost of this reconstruction if other donor countries in the world refuse to cooperate with it and share in financing the reconstruction process while it remains an occupying power inside Gaza. Another reminder before we move on. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us a lot. In a recent article published by Israeli economic journalist Gad Lior, senior officials estimate that occupying and maintaining control of Gaza could cost between 10 and 15 billion shekels per month, adding up to as much as 180 billion annually, or the equivalent of between 35 and 52 billion US dollars. These new costs would come on top of what Israel has already spent. In May, Israelis expected it to cost them about 25 billion shekels. Finance Minister Smotrich recently announced that the war in Gaza has cost about 300 billion shekels, roughly $90 billion. Expanding the scope of the occupation to include the entire Strip will significantly increase this bill to an extent that the current Israeli budget may not be able to bear. According to Israeli estimates, occupying Gaza will require calling up about 250,000 reserve soldiers. Calling up and mobilizing such a large number of reserve soldiers faces 2 problems. Another reminder before we move on. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us a lot. First, it is very costly. According to calculations by the Israeli Ministry of Finance, the cost of mobilizing 10,000 reserve soldiers amounts to about 400 million shekels per month. This is a direct cost. There are also indirect costs, since reserve soldiers are ordinary employees pulled from their jobs. The Bank of Israel estimated their absence costs the economy about 2.3 billion shekels, around $600 million, every week. The second problem is that after nearly 2 years of war, reserve soldiers are exhausted, and many are refusing call-up requests. The Israeli government does not disclose the numbers, but Plus 972 magazine reported that the army is facing its worst refusal crisis in decades, with estimates that only 50 to 60% are responding, meaning up to 100,000 have stopped serving. Many of these soldiers have lost jobs or suffered social setbacks from long deployments, and their frustration has deepened as Netanyahu continues to exempt Haredi Jews from service to preserve his coalition. Netanyahu shields Haredi Jews from service to keep his coalition intact, as their parties threaten to bring down his government if conscription is enforced. In practice, almost none respond to call-up requests, leaving about 66,000 Haredi youth, roughly 13% of potential recruits, outside the army, according to a 2023 report by the Israel Democracy Institute. Assuming the Israeli overcomes all obstacles related to reserve forces or troop numbers and succeeds in occupying the Strip one way or another, at that moment, the most difficult and costly phase will begin, which is the phase of the Israel's presence and continuation on the ground in Gaza. The good news is that Israel already has extensive experience in occupying the Gaza Strip, as it remained occupied from the 1967 war until 2005. The bad news is that Israel's experience in the Strip during those years previously led it to conclude that occupying the Gaza Strip was a failed and unsustainable idea. Israelis are again talking about seizing land in Gaza, but they tried this before, maintaining 21 settlements until 2005, when Ariel Sharon ordered withdrawal after concluding the cost of occupation far outweighed staying. Securing settlements in Gaza was a nightmare for the Israeli army, which had to allocate huge resources to secure several thousand settlers living in Gaza. Dov Weissglass, Sharon's chief of staff at the time, recounts and says that every movement of settlers to and from the settlements became a military operation. For example, if an Israeli child wanted to leave the settlement he lived in, cross the borders of Gaza, and go to his dentist in Ashkelon, you might well find that child riding in a small Subaru car, with a Merkava tank in front of it and another Merkava tank behind it. And you might even find a helicopter flying with them in the sky. And this was exactly the opinion of Ehud Olmert, who was Sharon's deputy at the time. Olmert believed that there was no logic whatsoever for Israelis to remain in Gaza and said verbatim, "We have 10,000 settlers protected by 30,000 soldiers." Israel withdrew from Gaza in September 2005, and at that time, the Palestinian resistance in Gaza did not possess a tenth of its current capabilities, whether in terms of soldiers, experience, weapons, or tunnels. These capabilities, without a doubt, a large part of them were damaged in the current war in the Gaza Strip, but what remains is still much greater than before. Today, in 2025, Israel's continued presence in Gaza exposes its forces to heavy losses in both equipment and personnel, especially given their inability to decisively win a guerrilla war against Hamas, which has refined its combat methods over nearly 2 years. The Israeli chief of staff has warned that Gaza could become a trap for an already exhausted army. A senior security official told Israel's Channel 12 that the situation could mirror America's entanglement in Vietnam, where the US, despite winning every battle, spent 15 years, lost over 58,000 soldiers, poured in $140 billion, and still withdrew in defeat against a weaker enemy relying on guerrilla tactics and tunnels. Years later, former U.S. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara admitted the Vietnam War had been a needless entanglement, saying, "We were wrong, terribly wrong, and we owe future generations an explanation." Netanyahu may be selfish, but he is not stupid. Some believe the cabinet's decision to occupy Gaza is less a real plan and more a pressure tactic to push Hamas into concessions during ceasefire talks. This point brings me to the question of the episode. In your opinion, could Gaza actually turn into Israel's Vietnam? I will follow your answers in the comments. Finally, if you liked the episode and want to see us again, subscribe to the channel and see you in the next episode.